Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish on Sunday, the 24th of March. My name is Brian Liddy and I'm joined today by two guests. We've got Hugh Marshall, who's founder of the national newspaper in Wales and Talking Wales, and Ronnie Cowan, the SNP MP for Inverclyde since 2015. Both Hugh and Ronnie are frequent guests here on the show, for which we thank you both very much. But how are you both?
I'm very good.
Very
Here
well,
in
thanks.
Wales, the sun is shining.
Yeah, I'm sorry for
The sun
inviting
is
you both
shining and
to speak at the same
the
time.
sun is shining in Greenock as well. It doesn't have that reputation, but it's a beautiful day here this morning.
Yes, it's a lovely day here in Glasgow too. I'll start the show with our usual item, which is the Ukrainian update on day 760. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Vladimir Putin and others were seeking to divert the blame for the Moscow concert hall massacre onto the Ukraine. The Russian president claimed without evidence that Ukraine had collaborated with the terrorist suspects who massacred at least 133 people on Friday night, and that four arrested gunmen planned to flee to Ukraine. Zelensky said on Saturday it was absolutely predictable that Putin had remained silent for 24 hours before trying to tie the rampage to Ukraine. Kyiv denies having any involvement in the attack, for which the Islamic State group has claimed responsibility. Ukraine's capital and the western region of Lviv came under a massive Russian air attack early on Sunday, officials said. Sergei Popko, head of the Kyiv City Military Administration, said the missiles were fired at the capital in groups in the third pre-dawn attack in 4 days. Preliminary reports suggested there were no casualties or damage, and the city's air defences had hit about a dozen missiles. In Lviv, the mayor, Andriy Sarovy, said about 20 missiles and 7 Iranian-made Shahad drones were fired at the region. They targeted critical infrastructure facilities. Polish armed forces said the Air Force had been activated due to the intensive long-range activation activity of the Russian Federation tonight and the missile attacks in Ukraine. It later said a Russian missile had violated Polish airspace. Moscow claimed a new territorial victory over Ukraine's forces in the country's east, while the two sides staged deadly aerial attacks on each other. Saturday, Russia's military said it had seized the Ukrainian village of Ivansky, just north of Bakhmut, the devastated city seized 10 months ago. Russian forces have taken control of a string of frontline settlements in recent weeks as Ukrainian forces suffer troop and ammunition shortages. Multiple Ukrainian air attacks on the Russian border region of Belgorod, adjoining Ukraine, killed 2 people and injured at least 7, the regional governor said. Farther east, a drone attack on the Samara region caused a fire at a major oil refinery, the last in a series of strikes against Russia's energy industry. The latest in a series of strikes against Russia's energy industry. Forgive me. Russia said on Saturday it had repulsed a barrage of Ukrainian missiles fired at the annexed city of Sevastopol in Crimea. Energy workers in Ukraine were still restoring electricity supplies to some consumers a day after what Kyiv said was Moscow's biggest attack of the war on the country's power grid. Authorities said on Saturday. Zelensky said that the technical possibility for electricity supply had been restored in most affected regions, but that the situation in the eastern Kharkiv region remained difficult. Before I ask you what you thought, I should have said we started a wee bit late today, so thank you for your patience, everybody. I'd like to ask you first, was there anything in today's update that you would like to comment on?
Yeah, I think it's quite disturbing, especially as we've had the terrorist incident in near Moscow, and I think it's is it 20 years since the Beslan was the last terrorist attack, and obviously IS or a branch of IS have taken responsibility, but it sounds like Putin is already trying to paint Ukraine into the picture, which is unsurprising. But it just shows you, the sort of the depths that Putin is willing to sink to. And it just makes you wonder how long Russian people can go on, believing that Putin is keeping them safe.
Thank you, Hugh. Ronnie, is there anything that you'd like to add?
I think your opening remark is it 760 days now that this war has raged on, and certainly it was my impression at the start of this Ukraine would not be in a situation to defend itself for 760 days. So the effort and the dogged determination of the people of Ukraine to repel this invasion for that time has to be commended. They're up against a force you would imagine would sweep them away, and yet they've dug in an incredible loss to themselves, to their society, to their families, but they're not going to roll for Russia. And they made it absolutely clear, and the more help and support we can give them, they deserve it. They're standing up against this force, as Hugh pointed out there, a force that will stop at nothing to tramp over Ukraine, and now they're going to wrap in an ISIS attack on innocent Russians, and they're going to use that as the next arm to turn people's attention away from what they're doing and onto the people of Ukraine. So I think there's always a media war, a propaganda war going on at the background of these things, but 760 days, I cannot begin to imagine what it's like to be a Ukrainian, having your life turned upside down by this, and see your family scattered to the four winds, to see many people die and injured. And there's no sign to end it, because the Ukrainians are not about to fold on this. They're going to fight the very last person.
Thank you, Ronnie. And as you say, it's sad that it's 760 days that we've been doing our daily updates, and now, sadly, we move on to the next item, which is the update in what's happening in Israel and Gaza. As casualty figures in Gaza reach 32,226 Palestinians who have been killed and 74,518 injured since the 7th of October, calls for an immediate ceasefire are getting louder as even the US calls out the humanitarian crisis. How long can Israel continue to resist ending the conflict? Ronnie, would you like to tackle that question first?
How do we end this?
How long can Israel continue to resist ending the conflict? Yeah.
I don't see any sign of Israel changing its stance. It's not as I was seen as a softening in their position. They've held out an olive branch that they've said they see an end to. They said once we get to this stage, that will be it. From my point of view, they're only interested in completely wiping out Palestine and everything that is, and then occupying it and making it a part of a greater Israel. The offers they've talked about in the past basically have the Palestinians under Israeli rule. It's not acceptable. With this kicked off this time round, we know we can go back for. I've got a local Palestinian group here, and one of them came and talked to us at a group meeting and educated us on the history of the place. And I sort of naively expected him to go back to maybe the Balfour Declaration or something like that. He went back thousands of years and said this is how this area has developed over time, with different tribes coming and going, and this is how we got to the situation we're in now. So it's a very, very complex situation. But we've had areas of peace over the last few decades, and then it kicked off again, obviously October the 7th, with the horrendous and completely unforgivable attacks from Hamas on the people of Israel. And nobody that I know who supports Palestine has turned around and said there's any justification in that. Nobody's supporting Hamas in this current war. But Israel have to understand there's a lot of sympathy, a lot of empathy, a lot of support for Palestine as a nation and the peace-loving people of Palestine. So they have to understand that annihilation will result in a longer ongoing war against the state of Israel. And common sense would say, what is it you're trying to achieve? Put it on the table, let people debate it, let people talk about it. But there's this complete impasse where Israel paints Palestinians as being less than human, and Hamas have painted Israel as being less than human, and the innocent people of Palestine are caught in the middle of this, many of whom have lived under the rule of Hamas for years, unwillingly. Simply to say Hamas run that region. The people of Palestine, many of them would distance themselves, most of them would distance themselves from Hamas tomorrow if they were given the opportunity.
Thank you, Ronnie. But do you think, is it significant that I think this week, for the first time, the United States has supported claims for a ceasefire? I think there was a vote in the UN recently. Do you think, is this, And I think wasn't President Biden overheard when his mic was still on, where he said something. When someone said, "Oh, people will have heard that, and that will go out," and Biden said, "Good, I hope they hear it." So, do you think are we the only people now that don't? The UK are the only people that don't support a ceasefire?
I think when you hear that, it gives you that little bit of hope. And we always talk about the peace, the resolution of things that often happen to what we term the usual channels. It's the people in the background. It's not the politicians, as we know. It's the civil servants, the people in the background who talk to each other and say, how can we take this forward? And they can do that because they don't have the fear, they don't have the glare of the media on them every minute to do something like Biden did there and make maybe a remark like that. They can have conversations with people in neutral countries and say, okay, where do we go with this? So I think the real hope for peace lies with them. Great to hear that Biden's said that. You know, he's in an election year. Yeah, a lot of things get said. So I think the United Kingdom, I'm ashamed. I'm part of the Westminster Parliament. And I'm absolutely ashamed of the stuff I hear down there where people collectively will say one thing privately and then another in public. And you think, there has to be a point where the UK government is brave enough to actually stand up and take a stance. I mean, a total immediate ceasefire has to be the way forward. That's the way you get people around a table to talk. It cannot happen to the same degree when both sides are having people murdered. If you're going to build trust and you're going to build respect, you start with having a ceasefire. And hugely important, given the situation we're in now in Gaza, is to allow in the Red Cross and whoever who are going to provide food and water and sanctuary to these people and allow them to actually, I'm going to say, put their lives back on track. When you look at the physical devastation of what's happening in Gaza, it's going to be a long, long time before you can say things are back to normal there. But at least getting medical supplies and water through to people will alleviate their current suffering. But long term, yeah, I want to see a stronger stance from all nations around the world, and the United Kingdom are, as you say, trailing at the back of that list of countries.
Thank you, Ronnie. So, Hugh, do you think the US's change of mind on this is going to make a ceasefire more likely?
You would hope so. Obviously, the US are Israel's biggest backers, financially and militarily. So they do have huge influence. But as you say, it's an election year, and it is an incredibly difficult situation. And you see the pictures of utter devastation in Gaza. And I was reading they're building the new harbour now in order to bring in aid from the sea. They're actually using rubble from people's houses to build that harbour. And sadly, it would appear that there will be, pieces of Palestinians in there as well. Because thousands of people have lost their lives and, they haven't been fully recovered. So it's just awful. And the fact that we're having this conversation on almost a weekly basis and there doesn't seem to be any progression. Netanyahu knows that he's finished politically. He's trying to use, this position to try and sort of eke out his leadership. He's clearly very unpopular. The Israeli people in general, I think, are very unhappy with the way that they've handled this, especially with regards getting the hostages back. But it's a horrific situation. I saw pictures yesterday of queues of lorries with aid waiting to get in, and it's been delayed because Israeli authorities are stopping that from happening. So they are complicit in the suffering of the people. And yes, Israel has a right to defend themselves, but to me this isn't defense. This is trying to wipe a group of people off the face of the planet.
Thank you, Hugh. So the next item is the Bosnia European Union, Bosnia and Herzegovina is this week the EU agreed to begin membership negotiations with Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's a historic step. in 2019, the European Commission set out 14 key priorities before they could join the EU. The country didn't meet them at the time. It also didn't meet fully 8 steps that the EU had defined when granting candidate country status in 2022. Brussels last week said the country had completed some of the steps required, but outstanding judicial and electoral reforms remain. Hugh, I think it's your turn next. Is this the EU speeding up the process because of what's happening in Ukraine and trying to secure the region and from the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, and obviously, Bosnia's history, and we're talking about recent history, that there are similarities with what's happening in Ukraine. Now, they have a lived experience of war that killed many thousands of people. Yeah, but it's interesting. You can see from from the EU, and I think what Ukraine has shown, the importance of having that collective group within the European Union, whether you're sort of for EU it, and I'm sure nobody thinks that the EU is perfect. But yeah, and I think that's why it's disappointing that as Wales sadly voted a small majority in order to Brexit. But I think we need to take into consideration now that that people took that decision based on information that was incorrect and is now proving to be incorrect. But yeah, hopefully Bosnia, they can accelerate things. Hungary is a problem, clearly, because Orban is almost like single-handedly trying to sort of fight against the EU and is siding with Russia. So again, Hungary coming into the mix, and hopefully with people like Bosnia coming in, they can act as an influence against people like Orban as well.
Thank you, Hugh. Ronnie, I wonder, have you heard any debates or any conversations with your colleagues down in Westminster about this?
To be honest, we're focused very much on domestic issues right now, but when you're talking about the story there, we've just come off thinking about what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening in Palestine. And this latest move for Bosnia-Herzegovina pretty much fills me full of hope. When back in early 1990s, 92, 93, 94, maybe a little longer than that, when the war was raging there, they were in a very similar situation where houses where villages were being bombed out, and horrible war crimes were being committed. And now we've got a situation where we've got a stable country which has actually met the foreign policy for security, and that's one of the ticking boxes they've just achieved now in terms of getting EU membership. So it's a long time, and a lot of suffering has been encountered by the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina. But it actually gives me a bit of hope that we can solve the problems elsewhere in the world. So yeah, of course, we discuss it down the road. But to be absolutely honest with you, right now we're so tied up with the local situations regarding austerity that we've all got in our own constituency. That's probably our primary recurring conversation that we have.
Thank you, Ronnie. Both Hugh and Ronnie, both of you have mentioned the war, which came about after the collapse of Yugoslavia. I suppose, Hugh, there's a lot of talk about independence for Wales beginning to become more popular, certainly, and same here in Scotland. Do you think that maybe, basically, I mean, like, why not Wales? Do you see any kind of parallel how Wales would be treated when you become independent and you decide that you want to join the EU?
Yeah, and I think there is, as in Scotland, there is a desire amongst many people to join the EU because the benefits outweigh the negatives. But there is a lot of skepticism. There's still some skepticism here in Wales from people who want independence. They want independence from the UK government, but they also want independence from any other government. So it's a balancing act. But again, we have to make the case. We have to explain what the benefits are. And I think in a global economy and a world of of global challenges, especially when it comes to security, we are better off, as part of a wider group we're treated as equals, and I think that's the big difference. Is I think people's attitudes towards the union in the UK would be different if we were treated as equals, but clearly, currently, we're not.
Thank you, Hugh. Um, Ronnie, the same question to you then, really. If why not Scotland?
Well, in the referendum back in 2014, we were told quite categorically that we would not be allowed back into the EU. At that point, obviously, the United Kingdom was part of it. We debated at the time, we questioned the wisdom of that sort of judgment. We thought Scotland would be able to pretty swiftly negotiate our way back into the EU if that's the will of the Scottish people. They want to be part of the EU. I personally would want to be, but I respect the fact that other people in Scotland may differ from that. There are other ways of doing this through the EFTA and the other bodies, other European countries have managed to negotiate themselves as a hybrid version of what being in the EU actually means to them in terms of do they take on in currency or different trade deals. It can be done. And of course, since then, we've had Brexit. And 64% of people in Inverclyde voted not to leave the EU, 62% I think across Scotland. So here we are now, as part of the United Kingdom, not in the EU, a position which was used to threaten us during 2014. So I genuinely believe that anybody in Scotland, the path is there. I think other countries, because once we vote to be independent, I think other countries within the EU will feel more free to stand up and say, of course you can go through this process, but we need to see what's happening around the world. We can clearly see that other countries have negotiated their way into the EU, and they're doing it in their own way, and it's not a one size fits all thing anymore. There are things you can take on or not take on, and the EU's been a little bit more flexible about that. So I think a clear path for Scotland once we're independent would be to negotiate our way back into the EU. But I'd say I understand why some people would want to see a version of that or a hybrid version of that, and I think we'd have to be open to listening to that.
Thank you, Ronnie. And I suppose I don't want to steal any thunder from Bosnia and Herzegovina. So, Hugh, when you think about it, the Bosnian War was between 1992 and 95. It's not that long ago, well within living memory. There's been post-war reconstruction. Obviously, this had to be done as well as trying to meet the EU's requirements. So apparently they've gone into now a stabilisation and association process. I mean, so it's an incredible amount of work. I mean, they deserve quite a lot of credit, don't they?
Oh, it's incredible. Because I think we are of an age when remember the conflict, and it was, I think people forget how bad it was. It was devastation. We saw things like because we remember Torval and Dean winning the gold medal in the Winter Olympics in Sarajevo, and seeing the utter devastation of where that took place, and it just brought it to home. It's basically a Western country, very much like our own, like Ukraine is, and war can happen. But yeah, no, definitely, the fact that they've rebuilt, and also the fact that they've managed, because obviously that conflict was based on conflict between people in that part of the world, and the fact that they've managed to keep peace and develop peace as well. I think that needs to be commended as well.
Thank you, Hugh. And so, Ronnie, Sarajevo was an EU city of culture in 2014, and so again, just shows that it's always had ties, I suppose, with European Union, and it just shows how much work has gone on since the war.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned there the Torval and Dean 1984, and maybe that was the view we always had of Sarajevo. The Winter Olympics were taken there, obviously, and then terrible atrocities, a horrible war. I remember very, very clearly. I remember one day speaking at a conference, and I was quite nervous at the size of the audience I was looking to, and I thought, this is ridiculous. And I switched to a television, the war stories were coming through from Bosnia, and I wrote Bosnia at the top of every sheet of my notes, thinking, these are people with real problems, life-threatening problems, devastation. I'm just talking to an arena of a few hundred people, and that's to put things into perspective, and to see them over the years since that war slowly rebuild their country. And you say 2014 was it European City of Culture, and to get to the stage now where they're wanting to be part of the EU. I say it gives me hope. It's not the blink of an eye. It takes decades to achieve these things, but they're perfectly. They're achievable, and I think maybe for the younger people in around the world, we can look at these things and say these things can be done with a little bit of patience, time, and understanding. Yeah.
Thank you, Ronnie. Our next item is the WASPI women. WASPI stands for Women Against State Pension Inequality, and this refers to women born in the 1950s. Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman, the PHSO, issued a scathing report into the Department for Work and Pensions treatment of women of state pension age. Some 2.6 million women were affected by the change in pension age. The report suggests that these women should get a payout of between £1,000 and £2,950. If everybody was to get the upper limit of that, apparently the government would face a bill of about £7.7 billion. And the law was changed in 1995 by his name's just dropped, the Prime Minister at the time, John Major, which saw women's pensions ages increase from 65 from between 2010 and 2020. But the problem was that nobody was told about this change. Apparently the government didn't send out any letters, and but they did put an advert in the Angling Times, and then women started to notice this change just by accident, really. Ronnie, again, being a parliamentarian, a policymaker, what's your take on this?
It's been a long fight, and it's been led by the WASPI campaigners. They have been magnificent in what they've done. They've kept themselves very firmly focused on the facts, and they presented them time and time and time and time again. And it's been that sort of campaign they've had to run. When George Osborne described, he described the WASPI thing, the change in the pension, as one of his biggest savings ever. I mean, that's brutal. The government have saved £181 billion by changing state pension for women. If they paid out £10,000 to the remaining 3.6 million WASPI women, that's £36 billion. They're still netting £145 billion, which is wrong. £10,000 is the very, very least they should be thinking about. I was talking to women a couple of days ago, just people in my local community who are WASPI women or women of that age, maybe not been involved in a campaign, and they're sitting there saying, I've lost £40,000 here. How can you turn around to me, there's your £10,000, which I should have had for years sitting in my bank or for me to enjoy my life with, and turn around and say, there's £10,000 and feel grateful for it. They're still running a net profit of £145 billion. But the government have been running from this for some time. I was digging through some old photographs, I say election year, and I found myself in George Square in Glasgow in 2017 with a group of the WASPI campaigners there, and I still know these women to this day. So I'm emailing them and talking to them, and I'm getting their take on what is and is not acceptable. And that's something that's been missing here. Yes, politicians talk to politicians, but the WASPI women have the opportunity to sit down in front of this government and say, this is our stories, this is what we're about. The PHSO have done their job. I know Rob Burns is due to leave his position as the Ombudsman, and I'm pretty sure he wants this off the table before the new person comes in to take that up that role, which has pushed it on a little bit, because this is report 2 and 3 put together. They've pushed it forward pretty quickly to make this happen. The report is probably all an ombudsman's allowed to say. The ombudsman does not have that much teeth. It can only make recommendations, but the recommendations are pretty strong, and it's pretty damning of the behaviour of DWP over the years. So an apology would be nice, but hard cash would be a lot nicer, and I think £10,000 is the absolute bare minimum that each woman should be looking for.
Thank you, Ronnie. So Hugh, the Ombudsman said the government should do the right thing and apologise and pay compensation. And this came about after the Second World War. The Labour government brought in universal flat rate pensions for everybody. 65 years you got it, started for men, 60 years for women. And then over time, back then, life expectancy was 65 years. And then, of course, we've all started to live longer, but the pension age stayed the same. So I think everybody, even the WASPI women, agree that something had to be done. But it's just the fact that they weren't told about it for 14 years. So Hugh, what's the take from Wales?
Yeah, the campaign has had a fair bit of attention here in Wales, and as you say, it was I think in order to compensate in full. You're looking at something like 37 to 40 billion pounds. And interestingly, it was in Labour's 2019 manifesto that they were going to compensate the WASPy women. They pledged billions of pounds for that. But you won't be surprised to hear that Annalise Dodds, the chair of the Labour Party, on BBC One this morning, rolled back on that and claiming the circumstances have changed radically. So it is quite difficult to see where the support is going to come from. An apology is one thing, but as we've already said, that we're looking at some people, they've lost out, sort of up to £40,000, and it was because they weren't informed that they couldn't make the alternative plans. I think people agree that having parity of pension ages, and I believe pension age is going up all time. I'm 55 now. I think I probably be about 72. I think, but when I'm able to retire. So changes in society, demography, those happen, and you need to keep up with it. But as I say, this has saved them a lot of money. But when it comes to sort of compensating people, they're clearly all that money's gone somewhere.
Thank you, Hugh. So Ronnie, well, back to Westminster. So the Ombudsman has no teeth. Hugh's just told us that Labour's got no plans to make any changes when they get in. What happens next down in Parliament? Or what do you think? Is the government going to do the right thing?
Well, this government's running out of time to do anything. Whether they want to do the right thing before they leave, and we're sort of presuming October, is up to them. I don't try to get into the heads of this Conservative government that often. But the figures that Labour promised in the 2019 manifesto was £58 billion. So you're now looking at £16,000 per woman. And I know that Labour are rowing back at that desperately. But I think there's a lever there, because we're expecting Labour to win this government, this next election, and form the government. So the pressure has to be put on them to say, this was your pledge. Well, what are you going to do about it? And I would be delighted. I'm seeing a Labour government coming to power. I think that's pretty much going to happen. But if they could come into power and say, here's 16,000 for each of the pension WASPy women, I'd be delighted. So I think maybe they should be held to that pledge to be back in 2019. Or if they're not going to stand to it, explain to the people, explain to the WASPy women, explain to us all what's changed since then. And we'll hear about COVID, we'll hear about economic crisis, but things were not that great back in 2019. And we've seen that money can be found when it has to be found. We saw that during COVID when huge amounts of money have been wasted on PPE equipment and so on. So I think there's an opportunity here, because we're in an election year, either forcing the Conservatives to do it while they're in power now, and they can tick in their box say, we solved that, late, but we solved it, or to put it onto the incoming Labour government and say, are you going to stand by your pledge of 2019? And if not, why not?
Thank you, Ronnie. And I should just say, I'm conscious that there's three men of a certain age here discussing WASPy women pension situation, but we did have a female guest lined up, but she wasn't able to join us at the last minute, and thankfully Hugh was able to step in, so thank you for doing that, Hugh. But I'm just thinking, the UK's got one of the lowest pensions in the developed world. Is this an indication that there's no sign that that's going to change anytime soon? Hugh, it's your turn to speak.
Well, like I said, the problem at the moment is we've got a Conservative government who trying to make out that their plan is working and that the economy is growing and recovering. They've, even though there's sort of record sort of tax intake, where the money's gone, Lord knows. It's clear that we're going to have a change of government within the next 7-8 months. But we've got an incoming government, a likely Labour sort of administration, who won't commit to anything, who try and sort of say that they're just going to carry on basically what the Tories are doing. They have very little sort of vision around the economy. Rachel Reeves is, I don't know, it's just, I don't see much difference between Rachel Reeves and Jeremy Hunt, to be honest. So it doesn't actually inspire much, for the foreseeable future. But what's going to be interesting here in Wales, I'm not sure when the next Holyrood elections are. So the elections here will be in 2 years' time. we've had 13 years of Labour government in Wales pointing the finger at Westminster, saying that that's where the blame lays. Well, in 2 years' time, it's likely that it'll be a Labour government that'll be down the other end of the M4, and they won't be able to point that finger anymore. So I think it's going to have an interesting effect on politics in Wales, and I'd imagine again, having a Labour administration in London compared to the Conservatives is going to have an impact in Scotland as well.
Thank you, Hugh. The next item is at the SNP conference in October last year, and the First Minister, Humza Yousaf, announced the council tax freeze, and he was immediately attacked for that in the media. But now, a year later, it's coming up for his first anniversary at the end of next week, which I'm sure we'll cover here on Broadcasting Scotland. The only two Scottish councils who had threatened to increase council taxes have now backed down. And we've actually got a video, and we were in Greenock yesterday, and we managed to get to speak to the First Minister in Greenock and your colleague, Ronnie, Stuart McMillan, MSP for Greenock and Inverclyde. So let's have a look at that video now.
You received criticism when initially announcing of a council tax freeze. Now that all the Scottish councils have accepted the freeze, do you feel vindicated in your announcement? And what did it take to get here?
Well, absolutely. I announced the council tax freeze because we were in the middle, and still are in the middle, of a cost of living crisis. We know that households are struggling up and down the country, and we can't control, as a Scottish Government, every single bill. What we can do is work with our local authorities to make sure aren't burdened with a rise in their council tax. Now, for some reason, Inverclyde Council in particular, even though they were getting a fully funded council tax freeze, were choosing to increase council tax bills by over 8%. I'm pleased they've U-turned. I'm pleased they've seen sense. And I'm pleased that the people of not just Inverclyde, but right across Scotland now won't have to suffer an increase in their council tax, which is in very stark contrast to some parts of England, which will see an up to 20% rise over the next couple of years in their council tax.
In my constituency, we have got an older population, we've got a growing older population, and there's a wide disparity in terms of people who have a lot of money and many people who don't have much money at all. So in my community, there has been a lot of people who have struggled in recent years, struggle financially. Sadly, the food bank usage has increased as well over that period of time. So this particular freeze will help households at a really challenging time, a really challenging economic time. So the council tax freeze will help many, many households across the constituency. And the cost of living crisis is not going to be tomorrow. It's not going to be certainly over the next couple of months. So this will certainly help over the next 12 months.
Do you think that media here in the UK has had an accurate portrayal of your record and your performance as First Minister?
Look, I don't worry too much about what the opposition have to say or indeed what some in the media have to say. The important point for me and the government to make is to make sure we're delivering, of course, for the people of Scotland. So whether it's, of course, an estimated 100,000 children that will be lifted out of poverty, whether it's a national council tax freeze, whether it's the positive record we've got in relation to Scotland's economy under the SNP, there's many good points and strong points of delivery that we can point to. So we've got to focus on delivering for the people of Scotland, and the opposition in some sections of the media will say what they want.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
That was Broadcasting Scotland's very own Patrick speaking to the First Minister and to Stuart McMillan in Greenock yesterday. Ronnie, this is your constituency, and it's been really bizarre in the run-up to this, how the convoluted twists and turns. The Labour-led council were going to appeal to Michael Gove to step in and sidestep the Scottish Government's offer. And I'm just, why in your opinion, did they resist this offer from the Scottish Government?
I think first and foremost I have to say credit to the local SNP councillors and to independent councillor Lynn Quinn, who stood up against us and has said, not just we don't want what you're proposing to the Labour councillors, but here's an alternative. And they worked out a budget which said we can do a 0% increase if we take the money from the Scottish Government, and there were no cuts to frontline services. And that was our being grown up and mature and responsible about what had to happen for the people of Inverclyde. Because what they did, they put the people of Inverclyde at the head of this argument and said, how are they going to handle a 8.2% increase in council tax? And as the First Minister and Stuart McMillan MSP pointed out there, in Inverclyde, one of the highest areas of deprivation and poverty in the United Kingdom, and people are at that line. Too many people are just living day by day, and to have them find any extra unnecessary expenditure is completely unthinkable. So, what was in the minds of the Labour Council when they thought they could do this? What was in the minds of the two other independent councillors when they backed it? What was in the minds of the two Conservative councillors when they abstained on it and allowed this to happen? I've got no idea. It appears to me that they were simply being politics of the whole situation. They wanted something to beat the Scottish Government with, and thought they could win this argument by saying to people, do you know what? We won't take the money from the Scottish Government. We'll ask you to pay for it instead. And then they were surprised when the government, that actually people in were saying, you know what? Actually, we prefer the idea of not having an increase in our council tax. I mean, who wouldn't? So then the argument became very convoluted. You say, Michael Gove, unbelievably, Labour run council running to Michael Gove to say, can you help us with this? Yeah, so they tied themselves in knots. They started making ridiculous demands of Shona Robson and saying, if you do, these two or three things, then we'll agree with you. And Shona basically said, no, I'm not doing any of those three things. You created this mess, you sort it out. And eventually they had to just screech a U-turn, try and paint it as some sort of victory. But fortunately, I say, the outcome is, at this moment in time, that the people of Inverclyde will not be facing a council tax increase next year. And the reason I put that slight caveat in the back of it is that in the media, social media, over the course of the weekend, there'll have to be a vote taken next Tuesday, and Councillor McCabe is just insinuating that this isn't over the line yet. So if he's going to try and play some silly games with this in the council in the coming week or so, then shame on him.
Hugh, I will definitely come to you, but Ronnie, as this is on your doorstep. I mean, but what was the actual thing that happened that made them U-turn?
I believe it was simply pressure put on them. I mean, we printed a lot of leaflets, we knocked a lot of doors, and every time we went to somebody's house and said to them, every single person I spoke to after this was announced, and I said to them, but do you know that this doesn't have to happen? And there's where's the money coming from? I said, well, it's coming from the Scottish Government. And really, really importantly, they've said they'll baseline it. So it's £2.9 million this year, and you, as a household here, don't pay any increase. But that £2.9 million will be in next year's, and the following year, and the following year, and the following year, because that's what's tied in. So over 10 years, £29 million. For some reason, the Labour run council think we don't need that money here in Inverclyde. And every single doorstep we went to and had that conversation, people understood it. And I think the drumbeat through local media, through local newspaper, where people were writing into them and saying, we're not happy with the situation. I think they suddenly realised they're almost standing. They were standing alone. There was two councils, Argyll and Bute, and this one. But Argyll and Bute, we knew they were going to cave in and they were going to change their mind, which would leave Inverclyde standing on its own. And suddenly that position felt a little bit uncomfortable to them, so they changed their mind.
Thanks for that, and I'm really glad that you talked about baselining because I was going to ask you about that, but you've answered all my questions there. Hugh, I'm just thinking, and did this make the news in Wales? And if so, are you as staggered by it as I am? And can you imagine any Welsh council refusing a cash handout from the Senedd?
No, it hasn't really sort of broken through here, because here, obviously, we have, and it shows, I think, the difference between the powers that both the governments have in Scotland and in Wales. So the Labour government here, I don't think they've got the fiscal levers to intervene with council tax. So in Wales, I've just been looking at the statistics now. The average in Wales is going up around 7.7%. The highest is Pembrokeshire. They're going up by 11.2%. The lowest is Torfaen, which is in the South Wales Valleys, 5.4. So across the board, we are seeing sort of increases. And I know that sort of Gove has said that there's going to be some additional funding for local governments because obviously there's a number of English local authorities that are in severe financial difficulties. So with Barnet consequential, some of that will come over, but it's not going to be anywhere near the shortfall, because the Welsh Local Governments Association estimates the shortfall next year to be around 432 million. So yeah, it's in Wales it's a different situation, and I think again it shows why we need better sort of media. So in Wales, we consume our media mainly from an English perspective, what comes out of London. So it's having these sort of conversations like we're having today, showing the differences between devolved governments in Scotland and Wales is really, really important.
Thank you, Hugh. And of course, I think you both said, this is happening in the middle of a cost of living crisis. But Ronnie, I read somewhere that there was charges of misogyny during the meeting that when this was debated. So Lynn Quinn, an SNP councillor, I believe in Inverclyde, described the meeting as misogynistic and hostile. She was told to sit down by a Labour councillor, and McCabe. Councillor McCabe, who you mentioned, is heard shouting full stop at SNP councillor Pam Armstrong. He then replied, is he allowed to just shout like that? Councillor McCabe said the meeting descended into chaos when the SNP brought an amendment that they hadn't prepared properly in advance. Have you heard anything about that, about the nature of the meeting? And
yeah, I watched the meeting. I didn't watch it live. It's still available on YouTube if anybody wants to go and look at it and draw their own conclusions. I watched a meeting where testosterone-fueled, angry men, red-faced, shouting across the chamber because they maybe understood their own argument unravelling in front of them. And it was right across the board. Councillor McCluskey made a speech, he was waving paper around. Councillor Cassidy made a speech, very angry, finger-pointing, shouting at people. Just no place for it at all. And the chair should have been stepping in and sitting them all down and saying, calm down, let's start acting like adults here. And he didn't. So it was a very angry meeting. It's not unusual, I have to say. Councillor McCabe's way is he likes to shout and badger people and put them into a corner. And he usually wins within his own party. But he doesn't win when he starts trying to behave like that to the SNP and SNP councillors. And Lynn Quinn, as you say, have stepped up to that. And it's a slight aside to that, and a really sad aside to that. Lynn's son, Matthew, is a member of the Scottish Youth Parliament. And I have to say, a more articulate, polite, engaging young man, 16 or 17, must be 17 actually, you find hard to meet. And he's been pestered on social media over the course of this weekend because he had his picture taken with Hamza Yusuf in Greenock yesterday, pestered by the local party, picking on a 17-year-old boy. And that's typical of them. It's typical of their attitude, behaved over the years. And it basically got to a point where we've seen it for years. And at that point, at that meeting, when we saw what they were trying to do to the people of Inverclyde with that behaviour, we drew a line under it and said, this has to stop now.
thank you, Ronnie. And can you just confirm? I'm sure that I read somewhere that this money that's coming from the Scottish Government to Scottish councils, all of which now have accepted the deal, it's not ring-fenced in any way, is it? Is that right? They can spend it wherever they like. Is that right?
No, it's there to offset council tax. This is the deal. We said at a conference that there would be no rise in the council tax in Scotland. So this is what this money is set off to do.
But the council tax is the money that comes in from council tax is used to pay for lots of different things, isn't it?
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah. Once you've got that money in, yeah, you're free as a council to spend your own budget the way you feel fit. But what we've said within the SNP Group Council is that there should be no. We believe that finance which is there available with this 2.9 million means no frontline cuts, and we've laid out our budgets to exactly what we spend on.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move on to our next item, which is senior people in Labour's shadow cabinet have lined up to praise Margaret Thatcher as a visionary who led a decade of renewal. So I think that we've got Rachel Reeves claimed that Margaret Thatcher delivered a decade of national renewal. David Lammy described her as visionary. Sir Keir Starmer said that she had brought about meaningful change and set loose her natural entrepreneurialism. And Darren Jones MP said that she held a decade of renewal overseen by Thatcher. It's actually your turn first. So I'm guessing that this would be how is this going to bode, do you think, but in the upcoming general election? Is it going to be similar to the way we think it might be taken here in Scotland?
Yeah, obviously sort of Thatcher here, her name, even though, to many people, I think people forget, sort of people over 50 don't remember Thatcher in the same way that we do. There's obviously still sort of hostility, especially in places like the South Wales valleys and the northeast, with regards how sort of she decimated communities there, with the miners' strike and the sort of decimation of the coal industry, and sort of heavy sort of industry like steel as well. But I think what's interesting is that the Conservatives, when I was younger, Thatcher was seen as sort of extreme, to the right. But when you look at today's Conservative Party, sort of Thatcher almost looks sort of like a liberal, and I think sort of there's lots of similarities between the Thatcher Conservatives and sort of Starmer's Labour. They're in the same political space. So I just think sort of time has caught up with us, and there has been this shift to the right from where Thatcher was, with the Conservatives going much further, and Labour moving over. Because I think there was similarities with Thatcherism with Blairism. There were lessons that he learned from Thatcher's period, and don't forget, she was very popular. It was things like the poll tax that finally did for her, but she was popular in England, in particular. But yeah, it's not going to play well in Wales. That's sort of the Thatcher thing. But I think we do forget that a lot of younger voters now have no idea who she is.
Thank you, Hugh. And you remind us that isn't she quoted as having said that Tony Blair was her finest achievement or something? But Ronnie, I'm guessing that you were in the chamber during PMQs this week, and I'm just going to give you Stephen Flynn's two questions. First one was, with his backbenchers looking for a unity candidate to replace him, which of the now numerous born-again Thatcherites on the Labour front bench does he believe best fit? He being Rishi Sunak. Born-again Thatcherites on the Labour front benches, does Rishi Sunak believe best fits the bill? Which of them does best fits the bill? Sorry, I'm making a mess of this. Second question was, the IFS have warned of conspiracy of silence which exists between the Conservatives and Labour parties when it comes to £18 billion of looming public sector cuts. Fiscal rules and he said that the fiscal rules of the Conservative and the Labour parties are identical. With such continuity on offer, the public are right to be anti-Westminster, aren't they? So hopefully you were in the chamber and you'll be able to tell us what it was like.
I was in the chamber, and PMQs is a pretty turgid affair of name calling and sort of stuff I talked about in the Inverclyde Council recently. But what happens there is that Labour shouts at Tory and Tory shouts back, and it really becomes two grown men calling each other names, which is I don't think what the people of the United Kingdom deserve at their seat of the democracy. But we can always rely on Stephen Flynn to inject a little bit of pace into the event and have us on the edge of our seats. So first of all, his first question, everybody saw the humour in it, apart from maybe the Labour front bench, but everybody was laughing because and through humour, quite often you hit the nail on the head, and they absolutely did. You cannot get the proverbial cigarette paper between Labour and Tory candidates right now. I did a show earlier in the week, and we're talking about this, and for some reason we've been talking about Ant and Dec. And it struck me later on because we came onto the subject matter, and I said, at least when you look at Ant and Dec, Ant's got the decency to always stand on the left, and Dec always stands to the right, so you know which is which. With the Labour Party and the Tory Party, that gap has narrowed and narrowed and narrowed, and have now merged into one. We've got no idea whose policy is which. And Rachel Reeves to turn around and say, basically say she goes with all the same fiscal policies as the Conservative Party would be, and the Conservative Party, as was pointed out there, have become more Thatcherite in their views, and also embraced Thatcherism again, which at one point was absolutely poison in the political arena. You wouldn't get near it, you wouldn't touch it. And yet over the years, it's mellowed a little bit, and that tends to happen. It wasn't as bad as we thought it was. Well, I lived through it. I lived through the Thatcher era. I lived in Greenock, because I still do. You come to Greenock and tell people about Margaret Thatcher and see what sort of reaction you get, because they still remember Thatcher. She closed she decimated the coal industry. Labour closed coal mines as well. but Thatcher closed them down. She made them unworkable. So after the strike, many of them had flooded and it was uneconomical to open up again. When you do that, it costs you the steel stores, steel become unproductive, so she closed that down as well. Shipbuilding, where we're going to buy our steel from, it's cheaper just to get boats built abroad, so she closed down the shipbuilding industry. And this, she put all her eggs in one basket, and that was pretty much in Canary Wharf. She thought by being this financial powerhouse, the whole of the United Kingdom could get rich on the back of this. And what happened was, the images we see still preserved in the historical archives is some very, very rich people making lots and lots of money, spending it in very lavish lifestyles, and the vast majority of society getting left behind. She sold off social housing, a good policy. People want to buy their social housing, but you've got to build behind that. You've got to replace this housing stock which you're selling off, which she didn't do, and then subsequent Labour governments didn't replace them either. So Thatcher's legacy is one that they should be absolutely ashamed of. And for any politician from any party to try and associate themselves with that era and say, well, that was beneficial for the United Kingdom, they must have. They either didn't live through it, they don't understand it, or they've got a very, very short memory.
Thank you, Ronnie. Hugh, what do you think about the fact that once again Stephen Flynn is able to skewer both the leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister in one fell swoop?
Yeah, as you just say, the difference between Conservative and Labour, it's that, it's like the thickness of a cigarette paper that separates them. But I think we have to remember as well, if you go back to the 50s and 60s, I remember my father telling me he would have been in his sort of early 90s now. As a young man, he voted Labour and Conservative. There was little difference between them, but they were both sort of quite moderate. There wasn't much extremism there, and there wasn't that much change. And it's in recent times where we've seen this shift and this polarization, and especially now, where we see the Conservatives in their death throes trying to become sort of even more right wing, because we see they're tanking votes, but it's to Reform Party. That's where it looks like now. There's 30% of votes out there to be won for the Conservatives and Reform. That's what it looks like, and they're desperately trying to keep hold of as many of those votes as they can. Obviously, my concern is in Wales with the Senedd elections being on PR, that we will see the return. We had years of Brexit Assembly members, as they were then, who delivered nothing, gave nothing. They did nothing when they were there, apart from sort of being negative and spoiling things. And that's my concern, is when we need more and better sort of politicians, that we're going to be having a percentage of people who are there for for selfish reasons and who want to actually abolish the institution that they're joining.
Thank you, Hugh. And I hope you both don't mind. I'm being a bit cheeky keeping you a bit late because we started a bit late. But Hugh, Stephen Flynn was invited to speak at the Plaid Cymru conference this week, and basically he outlined how much the SNP and Plaid have in common and how they've got a real good working relationship in Westminster. Do you want to? And you've got a new First Minister, Mr. Gethins. I think the last time we spoke about him, you weren't that enthusiastic about him, were you?
Yeah, well, like I say, sort of. So we got Vaughan Gething now, who's the new First Minister. There was talk about sort of some Labour Senedd members were going to revolt because they weren't happy with the way that he won. He sort of accepted over £200,000 of donations for his leadership campaign, which is it's a staggering amount of money when you think about it, from a company who one of their directors been convicted twice of environmental offences. And it was interesting, Politics Wales, which is a Sunday morning politics show in Wales, first week since the new First Minister, and there was no minister from the new government available to speak. But yeah, no, it was great to see Stephen Flynn was the Plaid Cymru Spring Conference up in Carnarvon, and so yeah, I think the similarities are there, and obviously sort of you will know more about how the SNP and Plaid work together, but obviously hopefully after the next election we'll have some more Plaid members in Westminster.
Thank you, Hugh. And just quickly before we go, we're almost out of time, Ronnie. I think, can you maybe confirm that you do have a good working relationship with Plaid down in Westminster? I think you've worked with Plaid on a resolution for a ceasefire in Gaza, is that right?
Absolutely. Ben Howell and Liz are close to us. Physically, they sit behind us on the benches. We have a lot of a lot of conversations going back and forward. We sit very close in the tea room, which is always good for a working relationship. And we agree on a lot of things, and we do work in a very collaborative manner when it's appropriate for us to do so. Yeah.
Thank you, Ronnie. So I think maybe it is about time that I did let you both go and get on with your weekends, but thank you for your patience with me as well. So that's about it for this week's Full Scottish. But before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. You know that our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Although we've now reached our emergency crowdfunder target of £10,000, our focus now moves on to securing the future of independent Scotland, independent broadcasting for Scotland, by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. We cannot exist without your support. But once again, my very best thanks to Hugh and for stepping in at the last minute, and also to you, Ronnie. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Bye.